Views expressed by Casters Guild members are only the opinions of that member, and that could change from day to day. Guild members may use mature language, but that in no way means they are mature. Listener discretion is advised.
We've all dreamed of a better world, a future where humankind can be free of the concerns tethering us to this terrestrial ball, and we can explore the stars, discovering new planets and meeting new people, boldly going where no one has ever gone before. And that's the spell we're casting tonight on Casters Guild. Thank you for tuning in to tonight's episode of Casters Guild. I'm your Guildmaster Rick Perry, and an actual third-class petty officer that has served aboard the USS Enterprise.
And I'm Baron Kane, and I've also been on the Enterprise. True story, I was on the Enterprise once.
And we have a new guild member joining us tonight. Feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi there, my name's Daryl Cook, and I've also been on the Enterprise, except it was the Next Generation's mock bridge. So we've all been on some sort of
Enterprise.
There's the connection. All right, so we're talking Star Trek tonight. Honestly, if I'm going to be honest with our guild listeners, I've been struggling at topics for a little while, but I know you two are both fans of Star Trek. Personally, my only real Star Trek when I was really young, I used to watch Deep Space Nine with my stepdad. And I liked that. We watched that together. It was kind of like a family thing. We'd all get down around the same time and watch Deep Space Nine. And of course, when I was in the Navy, I served aboard the aircraft carrier, the USS Enterprise. But in preparation for this episode, I have been watching a few episodes of The Next Generation, and I've been really enjoying it. So let's go ahead and start with a question. We usually start, what's your favorite? And we'll say, what's your favorite incarnation of Star Trek? Like what season, what series, whatever you would call it.
So that's a really tough question. I know you probably were going to ask that question. I would say I have to go with me would be The Next Generation, because that was the first Star Trek incarnation that I watched. Never was a big fan, even though I'm 49 years old, born in 71. So the original ones were ones that were on reruns when I was a kid growing up. I never got into it. But in, I believe, 87, when The Next Generation started, loved Patrick Stewart before I knew who Patrick Stewart was. Still love him today and everything he does. So he's my favorite captain. The Next Generation really was the one that I love as far as a nostalgia, and because it was the one that got me into it. But if I'm bored and I'm sitting at home and I want to pull up Netflix and watch an episode of something, it's actually Voyager. And I know it's one that didn't get a lot of love, but the unique storyline that Star Trek Voyager had, pushing them out of Alpha Quadrant into the Delta Quadrant, where they got to open up and have, they could basically, it's like doing TOS again. They had all new aliens they could introduce into the Star Trek world, because they were in an area literally no one in the Federation or anyone in the Alpha or Beta Quadrant had went to. I liked that because it gave the writers, it took the handcuffs off. They didn't have to be so canon to the original series, TNG or Deep Space Nine. And it was just fun watching that crew get back. And I mean, 7 of 9 was hot. I mean, come on, you got to give it to her. Jerry Ryan at that time, that was easy on the eyes.
That was the first female captain too, right? Janeway?
It was that featured in a series. They had shown some female captains in some of the movies or as guest appearances, but for one, carrying the franchise, so to speak, of the Voyager show, yes. And Kate Mulgrew, who was not the first one, they actually hired another female, and her name is a woman. Her name is escaping me, but they filmed like an episode or two, and it just wasn't working. And so they went back and recast it, and Kate Mulgrew came in and just blew it away. Awesome actress.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and make a quick correction then. It was actually Voyager I was watching with my stepdad when I was younger, not Deep Space Nine. I just got my subtitles mixed up. So Voyager was the one I actually used to watch pretty regularly.
Makes sense. It was a good one.
Well, I would say, I'm going to have to say The Next Generation as well. I watched the original stuff before The Next Generation came out. I loved it, but something about The Next Generation really hit me in a good way. And I don't know if it's just because it was updating, because like, obviously when I watched the original series, it was old to me at already.
Right.
So I think it was them taking the Next Generation and wrapping it, or taking Star Trek and wrapping it in a skin that is more relatable to someone that's growing up at that time. All that said, I think Lower Decks is in the runnings to become my favorite, though. So
There's only like 3 or 4 episodes of that so far, isn't
I
there?
know, right? It's already making its way into my heart.
I was actually going to start watching that in preparation for this podcast, but I think I didn't have the streaming service that it was on, so I ended up watching TNG.
I tell you what, though, it's it's funny. It is a comedic show, but it's almost not even satire. You know what I mean? It's almost not even making. It's because all of it is canon. All of that stuff could theoretically happen in that world. It's just they're looking at it and through a funny lens. It's really good. Like surprisingly good.
And even though I don't know a lot about Star Trek, I'm going to go ahead and weigh in and say my favorite's probably The Next Generation as well. My only real exposure being a few episodes of the original series, because everybody's seen a few episodes of it, right? And then Voyager with my stepdad. But the few episodes I've watched of TNG leading up to this podcast, I'm probably going to continue after this podcast is over. I mean, I've been really enjoying it. And, watching it with my wife, and she pointed out to me, she's like, this reminds me a lot of Doctor Who. And I've always been a great big Whovian. And honestly, I can draw a lot of parallels between TNG and Doctor Who. I don't know if it's similar with other incarnations of Star Trek. But yeah, I mean, like a lot of the way you set things set up, a lot of shows, they present you with the conflict, and then the show is trying to figure out how to take care of that conflict. With Doctor Who, and what I've found with The Next Generation is like there's the conflict, and a lot of the show is trying to figure out exactly what that conflict is. And then once they figure out exactly what the conflict is, they usually like take care of it pretty quickly. It's the majority of it's almost for lack of a better term, like a mystery, like a whodunit. And honestly, with Q, I could totally see Q showing up in Doctor Who. You know what I mean? Like completely not out of place.
Mm-hmm.
Q was one of the best characters that, at least in modern day Star Trek writing, that they put in. He appeared in all of them, all of the big three. I don't think he made his way into Enterprise or Discovery, but between TNG, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager, you just waited every season. Are we going to get a Q episode? Because John Delancey, phenomenal actor, especially for what he did, and to be able to carry that character through 3 different incarnations of the Star Trek series was just phenomenal. It was so good. So love John Delancey anytime he shows up as Q.
Absolutely.
Hopefully they were paying him pretty well by the end of it.
Well, I mean, he showed up in The Next Generation. He showed up in Deep Space Nine, which was hilarious, and showed up in Voyager. So, I mean, he kept coming back. So he either had a lot of fun or they were treating him good.
Or maybe he was just a great big fan.
Yeah. I mean, it's happened. Also, you bring up the whole parallels to Who. You've seen some of the old Who, right? Not like before Eccleston.
Yeah, so my wife has seen a whole lot more of the classic Who than I have. She's seen pretty much all the classic Who that is available. Because, of course, the whole thing with classic Who is there's a bunch of it that's been lost to time. Like the footage isn't available.
Right.
She's seen all of the classic Who's that's currently available. I've seen probably about a quarter of it.
So, that said, watching all that stuff and then watching the original Star Trek, I'm sure you can appreciate the similarities there too.
Oh yeah. Especially, I mean, like let's really talk about that for a second, because they're both, I mean, like pioneers in their time when it comes to sci-fi. They were doing things that nobody had done before, especially with special effects, themes, writing. If you needed something to appear on screen, there wasn't some playbook that these shows could look at and go, this is how we make this appear on screen. They were figuring it out and making it happen themselves, and then other shows, movies were copying them for years to come. And not only in the special effects, but themes, and like they were pioneers in what they were putting on screen too. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Star Trek was praised. The original series was praised for showing the first interracial kiss.
Correct.
On screen.
On TV.
You know what I mean?
I think it's on TV. I don't know about movies, but maybe.
Sure. I mean, like either way, they were making leaps and bounds. And Star Trek was doing for the States what Doctor Who was doing for the UK and the BBC. But yeah, both they're definitely parallels there.
So that's why I think it's funny whenever anybody wants to bring up how like Star Trek is pandering to social justice warriors nowadays, and it's like, did you even watch the old stuff? How socially progressive it's always been?
Yeah,
ridiculous.
Gene Roddenberry is definitely a man ahead of his time. He was able to not only fantasize or create science fiction gadgets that we now use today. Still waiting on the transporter. Beat me up. But he also was ahead of his time when it came to being progressive and getting ahead of the curve when it came to racial or whatever the stereotypes were, breaking them and allowing us to move forward as a society and as a culture.
Mm-hmm. Also, we're giving a lot of thanks here to Gene Roddenberry, but we do have one other person that we have to thank for Star Trek. Even they probably would have never even made it this far if it wasn't for this person, Lucille Ball.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about that, because
Lucille Ball is like for the original episodes. Lucille Ball was I want to say that her production company was responsible for keeping Star Trek on the air, because CBS was going to cancel it, and she was like, no, this isn't going to happen, and pushed to keep it on the air. And because they did, they got, was it 3 seasons? I think the original series was 3 seasons.
I agree. I think it was.
They were going to cancel it in the first season, and because she pushed for it, they kept it going.
Nice. Good trivia.
Yep, definitely. Definitely. I mean, she has contributed a lot to culture as well. So I can't let this go without mentioning her. So yeah, definitely, we have a lot to thank her for in terms of this.
Yeah, that original cast, call it what you want, cheesy, hokey, whatever. I mean, like, it's really only that when you look back on it with the current lens. At its time, it was cutting edge and all that. But that original cast, William Shatner, George Takei, an actual Star Trek fan could probably go on and on and on, but that they were awesome, for what they were exactly what the show needed.
Oh, yeah, my kids look back at TNG, they see it as far as technology and special effects as I thought of the original series back in the 80s. So I get it. There's only so much you can do in sci-fi. That's where some of the imagination has to give away a little bit.
So what do we think about the because another thing I've actually seen from Star Trek is when the newer movies came out, the reboot movies, if you will. I've seen those. How do we feel about those movies?
As much as I like the reboots, Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto, I still like the first 8 from Shatner, and then them handing it off to the TNG group. I'd still give my nod to those because it's easy to reboot, like we saw in the newer ones. But when you hand it off from one TV series to the other in movies, I can't think of any other example where that happened. I just thought that was really cool, especially in Generations. You literally had William Shatner giving the reins over to Patrick Stewart. So that's always going to hold a special place in my heart.
I will say that I really loved the reboots. And you can't even really say it's a reboot because of how
Leonard
they
Nimoy
did-
showing up.
Well, it was a reboot, but it was also them using time travel, way before Endgame did, to explain why this is happening the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it was a cool way to reboot a series while at the same time honoring the old story as well. They just kind of took the story over to a new timeline, which is great. But I will say that, except for a couple, I'm still the original movies are always they're gonna hold that special place in my heart. Especially back when I was younger, me and my dad sat around and watched every single Star Trek movie, all 4 of them.
They've got a rich history of movies. I mean, once again, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's never been a TV series to have that many movies hit theaters.
I can't think of any. You had 9 with the original and Next Generation, and then 4 in the reboots, right? So that's 13 off of a 60s TV show.
Yeah, they all did. I mean, yeah, some of them didn't do as well as others, but they all did well.
Mm-hmm.
They all were profitable, some more than others. The even ones seemed to be the ones in the original series that were liked the best. But yeah, even 1, 3, and 5 still kept the series going.
And you know what? I like 3. So, whoever
Sure.
come at me. I don't care. 3 was good. And I liked 5 and 6, so whatever.
Of the original ones, the number 4, the Voyage Home, when they did had to go back and get the humpback whale, that was my favorite of the original ones. Very similar to not apples to apples, but there was an episode in Voyager where they had to go back to 1996, a little time travel there. I thought that was kind of like an homage back to Star Trek 4 in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about just Star Trek background here. What was the first time you remember seeing Star Trek? Like an episode, a movie? What was your first exposure to Star Trek?
So it was the movies. Like I said, I never really paid attention much to the original series when they were on reruns in the late 70s, early 80s as I was growing up as a kid. But I did go see Star Trek 1 and that was interesting. But then the Wrath of Khan, again, being a kid growing up in the late 70s, Fantasy Island, Ricardo Montalban was big. It was one of my favorite shows when I was a kid. The Love Boat and Fantasy Island, I think it was on Friday nights. So seeing a character I already liked, an actor of Ricardo Montalban, then playing a bad guy, which is exactly opposite of his Mr. Rourke character on Fantasy Island, I was like, wow, man, that guy's really cool. So Star Trek 2 is probably what sold me on the Star Trek, fan the whole plateau of our platform, I should say, of the Star Trek world. And so from that, watching the movies, and then when Next Generation came out, it was syndicated here locally, and so I gave it a shot. And again, seeing Q for the first time, really what made me a Trekkie from that point forward. So I was sold for the rest of my life on Star Trek. But so I guess it would be the first 2 movies is really what kind of introduced me to the Star Trek world and got me loving it.
I wish I could tell you what my first memory, the first clear memory I have is watching the movies with my dad. But I know I watched it with him before. I was really young at the time, probably 3rd grade, kind of old.
Yeah, sure.
And I know we watched it. We probably just, watched it around just TV and stuff like that. Because once Next Generation came out, we were right there in his entertainment room, just watching Next Generation. So, and it was as it was coming out. So it was a good time. But yeah, I think probably the most concrete memory I have is watching the Star Trek movies with him. So, really young. What about you?
So I probably watching Voyager with my stepdad. Just it was kind of a thing where I didn't really have a relationship with my stepdad yet, but he was really into Star Trek. As far as I know, he was probably into Star Trek from the original series, and he'd just been watching it all along. And basically, it came down to whatever night of the week it came on, because I forget, I honestly don't remember, but it came down, let's say it was Thursday night, then that's just what we did that night. You know what I mean? We'd all get together as a family. After dinner, we'd pop popcorn. Everybody would sit and he got this is back when like big screen TVs were like brand new. You know what I mean? Like it was still projection screen, big screen TV, and like we'd all gathered around the big screen TV on the sectional sofa and watched. We watched Voyager, and I always thought it was cool. Like it was never one of those things where I was like, oh, I wish I was doing something else. Like I got excited about it, you know. Just after we left that house, and I lived with my dad for a while instead of my mom and my stepdad. It just Star Trek night wasn't a thing with them, and like I just never got back into it.
So off subject, where do you get one of those couches?
Adult IKEA.
Oh, got it. I got it. Sorry, had to get you.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. All right. So, let's see. How do I phrase this? So, let's say tomorrow you were to get your letter saying you were accepted into Starfleet Academy.
Well, first off, let me point out that means something completely different now with the events of this year.
Okay, yeah, sure. That's very true. But let's say you got that. Let's say you got that letter. I mean, are you the kind of person to let go of your whole life in order to boldly go where no one has gone before? Or are you accepting that letter?
Absolutely. One of my earliest, I think the reason that I meshed so well and in my personality and my life with Star Trek is when I was a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut. Again, I know I'm a little bit older than you guys, but I remember when seeing the very first launch of the Space Shuttle Columbia, which was the first of the space shuttles go up. And from that point forward, I wanted to go to space. I wanted to do where I wish I could get $1 million so I could give it to the Russians so they would send me up to the space station. I want to be part of Elon Musk's trip to Mars. I want to go to space. I know it probably won't happen, but yeah, I would 100% accept that letter because space travel and going up there would be something that just fulfill a lifelong childhood dream that 6-year-old Daryl Cook had back in the day.
Well, you bringing up the Space Shuttle Columbia reminded me of my first experience of a shuttle launch. That would be the Challenger, which kind of paints what I feel about space, which is probably why Bones McCoy is probably my favorite character in the original. And I can't remember the exact wording of it, but the thing he said to Kirk in the reboot when they were in the shuttle and he was talking about how space is terrifying. It's like, yeah, I feel that way.
Space has a lot of ways it can kill you, and all of them are horrible.
Yes. All of them are horrible. However, if I got a letter stating, hey, this is for Starfleet, and like this was like next generation level tech, and for some reason they were in my world, and they were like, come on, and I could bring my family. Yeah, oh yeah, I'd go. I mean,
that's the big caveat right there. If I could bring my family,
oh yeah,
because like up until I'm the type of person to join the military. I did it. You know what I mean? I would say up until about 3 years ago, I'd probably accept that letter, no question. But now that I have a toddler, like the idea of launching into space and possibly leaving my family behind isn't as exciting.
Well, that's the beauty part of Starfleet. It's not like, if we were sending someone to Mars, it's probably like right now with our tech, it's probably a one-way mission. You're not most likely coming back from Mars. There's too many things that could go wrong. Right. But in the Star Trek world, outside of some Romulans or Klingon fighting you, you're going to make it home eventually. You'll see that fam. So, we got to kind of think of it that way.
Yeah. The adventures of the Enterprise are very not common. Also, with, again, in like the original series, it was very much military. It reminded me a lot of a more open ship. Again, like I said, I was on the Enterprise, and it reminded me a lot of the original series stuff. Again, their hallways are more open. It's easier to walk through. But Next Generation, they all had their families up there.
The Galaxy class cruiser, I think, is what they call it.
Yeah, they had a school in there. They had their kids. It's because they're exploring. They're not at war. They're
Sure.
So yeah, hell yeah. Also, And I would have to say that the draw of space would not be my big reason for going. It would be the world that Starfleet existed in.
Yeah.
It is utopian.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a need for a lot of things, and people are living, I don't even want to say lives of leisure, because they are still working, they're still productive, they're still making, inventing, creating. There's art, there's sciences, there's industry, but they're doing it to help each other. They're doing it for the betterment of the galaxy, and it's like, yeah, I want to live in that world. I want to live in that world.
Mm-hmm.
You know what?
Yep.
Yeah, just take me back to that world and then drop me back off on Earth. I don't care. I will live on that Earth.
Sure.
San Francisco, hopefully, but yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. When I was aboard the Enterprise, I believe it was the 8th Enterprise to exist. The nuclear carrier Enterprise was the 8th Enterprise to exist. The first Enterprise being a merchant ship that was commandeered by the U.S. Navy, which is why it was called the Enterprise, because it was an enterprising vessel. So the series actually probably got it right to call some of their starships, the USS Enterprise, because it's been a Navy tradition to carry on that name. And now the most recent USS Enterprise, the one I served aboard, has been decommissioned. So the name is available once again. So it's only a matter of time before we name another ship the USS Enterprise. And regardless of how you feel about it, you know what I mean? Space Force is becoming a thing. And for all we know, the next USS Enterprise could be a shuttle. Could be something that heads into space.
Could be. Yeah, they're definitely not going to retire the name, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Don't look at me like that.
Don't give me that face.
Oh my goodness. Space Force.
Yeah, but we could see a USS Enterprise in space, and if nothing else, that should be a little bit exciting for geeks, I guess.
It is exciting. I'm surprised that we didn't have a shuttle. Did we have a shuttle named Enterprise? No.
Well, to be fair, at this point, the Navy would have to give up the name, because the name does belong to the Navy, and like most of, if NASA, everything that's been touched by space up at this point by the military has been with the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think the Air Force would probably go with any kind of Navy naming convention. So that's probably why we haven't seen a shuttle yet with the name Enterprise.
I was just double checking just to make sure. There actually was a space shuttle Enterprise, but it never went to space. It was their Mach 1 they used. They attached it to the top of a Boeing 747, and were doing. It was kind of like the beta model. They were doing tests to see if the space shuttle. I'm reading this right from Wikipedia. If it was built to perform atmospheric test flights after being launched from a modified Boeing 747. So it was kind of the one they were testing to see would this structure work in high altitudes while it's on top of a plane. So it never had an engine. It didn't have the functional heat shields, so it never went into space. But they used it as a test rocket to see if that would hold up. Like it was basically a shell that they used to see if it would hold up in higher atmospheres. So
that's actually pretty interesting.
But it was but I thought there was a special named Enterprise, so I looked it up real quick to make sure.
Yeah, that's actually pretty interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, it's funny when I served aboard the Enterprise, not a whole lot of people who served aboard the Enterprise would talk about Star Trek. But as we talked about before on this cast, around that point in time, it wasn't cool to be a geek. So, you know what I mean? Geeky things weren't talked about as much. Everybody, if they were talking about a movie that had to do with the USS Enterprise, everybody was kind of obsessed with Top Gun, since it was, filmed on the Enterprise. But I just thought that was kind of weird. You'd think that people serving aboard the USS Enterprise might talk about Star Trek a little bit more often.
You would hope. I probably would have gotten kicked off.
Definitely, if the next ship that gets it, it should be, since we're living in the millennia of the geek, it should be much more popular on board.
Oh my gosh. That kind of brings up the question. It's like, the kids that are turning 18 now, these ones, like, let's just say they make the Enterprise tomorrow. It becomes functional tomorrow. These kids are 18 now. How much Star Trek have they even been exposed to? That we kind of had a sweet spot where we just had a bunch of Star Trek, just a bunch. Now it's kind of like, well, we have Discovery, kind of. We have.
Yeah, you've got a point. I mean, it's probably not a whole lot, but I think it's enough to where, especially like with the reboot movies, I think it's enough to where they've probably been exposed to it, and with it being the era of the geek, if someone were to be assigned to the USS Enterprise today, and being the era of streaming and everything being available, they'd probably go back and watch some stuff. You know what I mean? True. Like that could kick off a whole new generation of Star Trek fans.
I'll just bringing out a new ship and putting a bunch of geeky 18-year-olds on it.
Exactly.
Maybe the ensigns and the yeomans may not know it, but the upper officers would be in more of our age group that would have grown up on that.
Let me tell you, being aboard the Enterprise, they have a media room, okay? Because obviously we're not connected to the internet, when you're out in the middle of the ocean.
Right.
And so basically they broadcasted about 8 channels throughout the entire ship. So wherever you were, you might have a TV and you could flip between channels. And they had one channel that was just like a live feed of the flight deck, so you could watch flight operations. They had one that was just playing different movies all day. They had one that pretty much played Top Gun on repeat. They had,
Stop it.
Yeah, I'm not really okay. I'm kind of over exaggerating, but they play 4 different movies, and one of them was Top Gun. So you got a 1 in 4 chance of hitting Top Gun if you were on that channel. But basically, they played different shows and different movies on different channels, and I can almost guarantee you that if they did that same thing on an Enterprise today, they'd probably have one channel that was nothing but Star Trek reruns. It'd be all the different series, all the different movies. It'd be Star Trek 24/7.
Okay, honest question, and not Star Trek related. How many times did you watch Top Gun?
You have to define watch Top Gun. Are we talking beginning to end? Or are we talking about just flipping through the channels and if you took all the segments of Top Gun that I watched and put them together, I probably watched Top Gun about 15 times.
Wow.
I probably watched it 15 times in the 1990s, so that's not really a lot.
And really weird, believe it or not, more than they played the movie Top Gun, there was this movie they kept playing, and I don't know why they kept playing it. Had Mel Gibson in it. I think it was called Maverick.
I love that
movie. And he was a gambler on a riverboat.
I love that. James Gardner.
Yeah. I've probably seen that movie more times than I've seen Top Gun, because they probably played that movie twice the times they played Top Gun.
Weird.
So don't know why, but maybe just somebody who was in the media room was a fan.
Your captain probably liked it.
Maybe.
So I can't think of any Star Trek tie-ins to Maverick, but still a great movie.
I'm sure we can think of something. But yeah,
7 degrees to Star Trek. Here we go.
Tom Cruise, his call sign was Maverick. Tom Cruise was on the Enterprise. There you go. There
you go. That's pretty quick. Watch that be the reason they played it. They were like, okay, we can't play Top Gun all the time. This guy, that's Maverick. So yeah, let's go ahead and play that.
Oh, that's probably a way closer. That's probably too close for comfort, honestly. Also, just a side note, I've never seen Top Gun.
Really?
Okay. Ever.
Interesting.
It's not even like I was avoiding it. It's never happened.
All right. So we've seen a lot of interesting races on Star Trek. Have any of them ever hit you? Kind of especially, do you have a favorite race that you've seen on Star Trek? I mean, let's say we discount humans.
Ooh. I really like Trill. They're weird, but I really like Trill. Wait. Yeah. No, I'm saying it right. The little wormy bellies. You know anything about them?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so...
Well, I might, but it might be one of those things where I don't know them by name.
Okay, Trill. They've got these leopard spots on the sides.
You mean talking about the symbiotic people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they are a race of people that have, not all of them, but they have a symbiotic relationship with like this other life form that I think is also called Trill, and it's like a worm that gets put in their, like they have a little pouch in their belly. Only certain Trill are able to bond with the symbiote. They may even just be called symbiotes. Anyways, so this symbiote is essentially immortal. It'll live almost forever. And it carries on the memories of each of its hosts. So technically, each host is also its last host and all the hosts. So, like in Deep Space Nine, Chetsia Dax is a Trill, and she holds the memories of Curzon Dax. And Curzon Dax was best friends with Cisco. So when Chetsia comes on board, she sees Ben Cisco, and like they immediately start talking, and but Cisco is familiar with the whole Trill thing.
Sure.
So So
I'm looking it up now, and I googled it, and I see pictures, and yes, I do recognize this race for different episodes that I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, when Cisco and Jadzia met, until she said her name Dax, that's when it kind of put together, because of course.
Oh, that's what it was.
Yeah, Cisco didn't know who, because she came up and hugged him and said, "Oh, it's been so long," and he's like, "Who are you?" And he says, "Jadzia." oh, you'll know me as Curzon Dax. And then so and in the show, since you didn't watch a lot of DS9, Rick, he for the whole show he called Jadzia, who, if you'd never seen her, was like a mid-20-something-year-old woman, but he kept calling her old man because of her symbiotic relationship with Curzon.
Right.
That was his name for her.
Oh, another fun trivia. The actress that played Chetsia Dax is actually married to Leonard Nimoy's son, I believe it is.
Okay.
Yeah, so she's a Nimoy.
That's neat.
Mm-hmm.
I think just from what I've seen, I think I'm going to have to say Klingon.
Well, hold on, though. Which one?
Well, it all starts with Worf.
So big warrior, rich head, not painfully racist.
Yeah. So, however, I will say part of what draws me to Klingons is their transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as, I guess, makeup, special effects technology got better, you know what I mean? They kind of morphed into this, ridged forehead.
Right.
Kind of race.
Which, let me tell you, that was a huge adjustment for me. Having, because I watched the original stuff, and then it went into Next Generation, and I was just like, wait, what? Did I miss something?
Can I tell you one of my favorite things? Oh, go ahead.
The lore around Klingons in general, really fascinates me. Like the whole warrior race, but the fact that you have a character like Worf, who, and I think it was the very first episode where Worf was like, I'm a Klingon, I have to fight, I have to protect my captain, and Picard was like, you are a Federation officer and you'll act as a Federation officer. And the fact that Worf was able to, kind of do that, not necessarily betraying his culture, because above all else in his culture, maybe obeying the order of a superior officer was probably more important than the fight. But just showing that depth and dynamic to the character of not being one note, even though up until that point the race was kind of one note. I just thought that was really neat.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to Baron's point on the difference in Klingons, and Baron, if I'm stealing your thunder on this story, but there is an episode in DS9 called The Trouble with Tribbles, where the DS9 crew had to go back in time, and they were interacting with their younger selves in the time of the Tribbles from the TOS. So they were taking old footage from TOS and merging it in with DS9. And when Cisco saw someone calling themselves a Vulcan, but they had the regular forehead and they didn't look anything like Worf, Cisco turned to Worf and said, "They're Klingons?" And he said, "We don't talk about them. Don't ask." And that was all they said about it. We're not going to talk about that. Just don't. So that's kind of how they explained it at that time.
Now, I will say that the ridge-headed Klingons I think appeared in Wrath of Khan, but I definitely know that they showed up in Search for Spock because Christopher Lloyd was a Klingon in that, which it was great.
Right.
He was a great Klingon, by the way, like especially like in regards to, anyways. But adding to that Trouble with Tribbles thing, they actually tackled that again in Enterprise, where they actually do explain why Klingons ended up looking like they did in the original series and why they ended up going back to the Ridgeheads. Because in Enterprise, which was set, way before the original episodes, the Klingons had the Ridgeheads, just like in the Next Generation. But yeah, but then they explain how they lost them. So I'm not going to do a big spoiler in case anybody wants to go and watch Enterprise, which a lot of people hated, but it's really not bad. There's a lot of time travel in it, which is confusing, but it's not bad.
The big problem with Discovery was Trek fatigue. It was the fifth show in a row, fourth show in a row.
You're saying, do you mean Enterprise or do you mean Discovery?
Enterprise.
Okay.
The one that only had, because every Star Trek kind of set the tone for 7 seasons. It could have went on. They wanted to go out on top. So DS9 got 7, Voyager got 7, and UPN just couldn't get Enterprise to 7. It only had 4 because of such bad ratings. But I think it was just because of Trek fatigue. There was just too many episodes that had gone on, and I just think that they kind of ran out of things to write about. And people. Plus, it wasn't on a great network. I think it may have done better if it was syndicated, like DS9 and Trek was. But being on a network show, it just wasn't getting the ratings that they needed to make it go on. But we haven't talked about Discovery yet. There was also some flat-headed and ridged-headed Klingons in that one, so that one was really good.
I am more than willing to accept them making changes dynamically to certain Star Trek races and stuff, but I don't know. I was a little confused with the direction that they took in Discovery, and I can't remember if I got an explanation as to why they looked like that. Like I mean, I've seen all of it. Was there a description? Was there a reason given?
I've only watched Discovery once through. I want to say that they did, but what it was, I just can't remember off the top of my head. I'm sorry, because it's been when they first dropped on CBS All Access, I guess in 2018. I watched them, but I haven't gone back and rewatched them since. So I couldn't tell you that. But at one point, the more the smooth-headed Klingons seemed to be more of the kingdom, or they were the ones that were like in the hierarchy. But then, because I remember the ridge-headed ones came in and kind of overthrew them or whatever. I'm probably getting it wrong, but I don't remember exactly what it was. But they did have there.
I think there was a book that went over something like that.
Yeah,
like they're one of the. I don't know if you just said that, and I'm just reiterating what you just said, but yeah, I think that there was a book that went into the bigger ridge-headed Klingons coming in and wiping out the smaller, more human-like ones. And yeah, I don't know. I think there was also something in the book stating that Klingons are Klingons because that is the empire that they're in. So that there could be like Gorn Gorn's Trandoshans. Good lord, there could be Gorn Klingons or Romulan Klingons if they were actually part of that empire. But I could just be talking and not know what I'm talking about because I can't reference the books. I can't give you a source to back that up at all.
Yeah, I never understood how the Klingon homeworld was Kronos, but they were called Klingons. Like we're from Earth, we're Earthlings.
Mm-hmm.
But Kronos.
Well, you could also say we're from Earth and we're human.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like human doesn't really, the name human doesn't really identify with the planet Earth. So
right.
But getting back, I guess, to the races, one of mine, and it's not a maybe one that a lot of people like, but I love the Borg as a race. Seeing them start off from when Q exposed the Borg to the Alpha Quadrant in the Next Generation, to see them just as everyone's seeing them as robots, and then you morph to Voyager, and then you get to see more of the human side of the Borg. When, granted, she was already human, I get that, but seeing a human post-Borg relationship in 7 of 9 and seeing her fight transitioning back to human after being a Borg her whole life, The Borg, and then there was the Hugh, which carried on in Star Trek Picard. Loved when they brought the Hugh character back.
And that was a great series, by the way.
Yeah, phenomenal series. So glad they're in a season 2. So I was always intrigued with the Borg. They showed up in all 3 of the canon, 80s, 90s series, and then kind of seeing them come to fruition at the end of Voyager, and then getting to see the post-apocalyptic Borg in Picard. The aftermath 20 years after basically the destruction in Voyager was really good. So I enjoyed the Borg as a quote unquote Star Trek race.
Yeah.
I've always thought that was really cool about Star Trek too, because they take a race that they are the bad guys, and then they'll straight up, turn them around and go, just because someone's born this race doesn't necessarily have to make them a bad person. You know what I mean? Like you had the Klingons, and then you had Worf, who became a member of the crew, and you had the Borg, who 7 of 9 became a member of the crew. You had forgive me if I pronounce it wrong, the Ferengi.
Yep,
or Ferengi, and I believe he was a crew member, or at least in the I forget. But there was one of them on Voyager as well.
What? Oh,
or no, Deep Space Nine. I don't know.
Deep Space Nine, and he was the bartender.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Well, but then his nephew Nog, who was best friends with Jake, went to Starfleet Academy, and he became an ensign in DS9 and served aboard the that ship they had, the
Defiant.
The Defiant. Thank you. Brain freeze. So Riker called it in one of the movies a cute little ship or something, and Worf got offended.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Nog was who you're talking about, Rick.
But yeah, I just always thought that was cool. They'll take something that, they'll say, oh, this race is the bad guys, but then they'll say just because someone's born of that race doesn't necessarily make them a bad person, and then they'll later take a member of that race and put them aboard the Enterprise in a later series or later in that series.
I will say that I'm noticing that, and I mean I've noticed this before, but the antagonists of Star Trek always seem to suffer from one bad thing that is really that's the showcase of their race. Like the Ferengi, it's out of control capitalism, greed, stuff like that, and then you have the Klingons, rage and militarization, and but the Borg, their big thing is you see progress, you see efficiency, you see a lot of good things with the Borg, but you take away their individuality, you take away their spirit.
Conformity is their big thing,
right?
Yeah.
So I love that they're like you can look at all these races and point out the bad thing that they are bringing to the galaxy, but there's a lot of good things that these people have too.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that they focused on the good as much as they focused on the bad, and that's exactly how they can do what you were saying. That's how they can come back and they can fit into the Starfleet world. How they can fit into our galactic utopia that Starfleet is trying to do.
So I don't know if I'm going to end up getting crucified for bringing up this series on a Star Trek podcast, because it's not Star Trek, and I know a lot of Star Trek fans hate it, but I also really enjoyed the Orville. Which
love the Orville.
Yeah, I watched the entire series of the Orville, and I don't feel like, a lot of people call it a parody, and I don't feel like it's a parody. You know what I mean? Obviously, it's a comedy. Yeah, I obviously it's a comedy. I think it's more of a tribute. And while it is a comedy, none of the jokes ever come from them making fun of Star Trek. You know what I mean? It's all the jokes come from elsewhere. And I feel like a lot of the things that they did would have fit right in place in Star Trek.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. The writers for Orville could have wrote for any of like the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, any of them. Easy.
Agree. And maybe I think I'm right on this, but when Seth MacFarlane, who basically is the executive producer and writer of the Orville, he wanted it to look as clean as a tribute or in honor of Star Trek, because he was a big Trekkie himself. So I think he hit the nail on the head. I think Roddenberry and Rick Berman and everyone in the Star Trek world would see that it was very much of a tribute, not a making fun of or even a ripoff of because it was had its own characters, but a lot of similarities, and I absolutely love the Orville as a Trek fan.
And me personally, and this could be reading into things, I think you could probably thank the Orville for the lower decks.
Oh yeah,
like you were saying, there was a lot of Star Trek fatigue going on with all of those series, and like they had to do something to inject new life into Star Trek. And when they looked at the Orville and they saw that comedy, worked, you know what I mean? Why not try it with the lower decks?
Yep.
I'm looking forward. I'm glad you guys are, or at least Baron, you're liking the lower decks. In this crisis that we're in, I tend to wait until a whole series airs so then I can binge watch it. So I'm waiting for lower decks to finish so I can watch them all at one time. So I'm glad that you're giving it a thumbs up because I'm really looking forward to watching it.
I really wish I would have done that too, but it's just like I saw it, and I work IT help desk overnight, so I have a little bit of downtime. So, so I got my laptop and I'm just looking. And it's like, well, let's give it a shot. Oh, mistake.
Because you like it enough now that you're like, oh, next episode, please.
Right? Yeah. It's like, give it to me. Also, I don't know why I keep dropping the fun little trivia on you, but Seth MacFarlane actually was on 2 episodes of Star Trek Enterprise as Ensign Rivers.
I did not know that.
Yes, sir. Oh, I had to look it up. His full name was Stuart Rivers.
Okay. All right. Is this?
Don't think that's a coincidence.
No.
Yeah. All right.
That's funny.
So the lower decks, I understand that like this is all the stuff that takes place like off of the bridge, and it's more like the operations of the ship, right? Are we seeing enlisted members of the crew of the Enterprise, or is it still officers?
No, wait, what? Say it again.
So in the Navy, you have enlisted, and then you have officers, right?
They're all officers.
Okay.
I don't think that there's any enlisted. Yeah. Well, I mean, come on, you all had Chief O'Brien. God, take it. In fact, they do make a reference. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but they do make a reference to Chief O'Brien that will make you proud of your enlisted status.
Okay. I'd like to see some petty officers is all, because like I looked it up. There was recently a Facebook thing, and it was like, ask me a geeky question, and one of them that I got asked, I believe it was by Daryl, was what's your Star Trek rank? Right. So I actually looked it up. I was like, okay, what are the ranks? And I saw they did have, the officers and the enlisted, and it pretty much mirrored Navy ranks. Yeah. So it was like, okay, well, I was a 3rd class petty officer, so I guess in the Star Trek universe, I'm also a 3rd class petty officer. So
I keep forgetting that you haven't seen that much Star Trek. Do you know who O'Brien is?
No.
Oh, O'Brien is like the most popular enlisted. Oh, no. He's one of the most popular characters in the show. Mm-hmm. And he's enlisted. He's a chief. He's a chief.
Yeah.
So, and he came in Next Generation. He kind of made his stamp there, and then they moved him over to Deep Space Nine, with which he was a main character in.
Okay.
So, yeah, there you go.
A little bit of representation, of the enlisted,
I mean, not a lot. But it's a big one. It's a big one.
Yeah, he went from being a bit character, maybe 3 or 4 episodes a season early on, to becoming a semi-regular character. And then, then he got his big break when Chief O'Brien moved over to take over the entire engineering department of DS9.
Well, and actually in Next Generation, they're towards the end of his run. They introduced his family. Like, even his family got plots. I mean, Keiko was even. She was
a school teacher on Enterprise.
Yeah, she was getting a lot of. Their wedding was a whole episode.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, I'm completely forgetting about all of that. That's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. To give you an idea how little I know about Star Trek, like I said, I was watching TNG, a little bit to kind of prepare for the podcast here. Episode 1 or 2 of TNG, they've got a visitor aboard the Enterprise, who from another ship. I forget what the name of the other ship was, but they were making a huge deal about like this old guy being aboard the Enterprise, and like
Stop.
and he wouldn't.
Are you serious right now?
Hold on, and like they wouldn't let him beam from one ship to the other. He was like, "No, you put me on the shuttle. You're not scattering my, molecules across the galaxy." And I was like, okay, obviously they're making some sort of reference I'm not getting here. And I looked it up, and I was like, oh, that's McCoy. I was like, so like. I didn't know. I was like, who is this guy that they're making such a big deal out of that Data's talking to?
And that was the actor too.
Yeah. I mean, like I looked it up, so like obviously I got all the little trivia. I was like, who is this guy? Because they didn't say his name. They just said, they didn't say, oh.
They don't need to Trekkies. We knew.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
exactly.
Right.
So I didn't. So I had to look it up. So like that's how little I know about Star Trek. So
you really need to keep watching too, because they do episode with Scotty as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to tell you how, but it really hits you. It really hits you pretty hard. It shows you that you should probably value things that you don't necessarily value.
Okay,
yeah, but I'll leave it at that. But go ahead.
Again, no spoiler alerts, but Leonard Nimoy was in 2 episodes of TNG.
Yep.
And then William Shatner, of course, in the movie Generations for the handoff. So all of the major characters from the TOS made it on to TNG somehow or another, either in TV or in movie.
Did they? Oh, in TV or in movie. Because I was about to say, Sulu and Chekhov were kind of underrepresented in the TV show, but they popped up in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, how cool would it have been to have a Sulu movie or TV show, something? That'd have been so awesome. Sulu was a big one in the fandom that a lot of people in the fandom are upset that he didn't get a thing, because he was a big deal, especially like in the books and stuff. Yeah.
I will say, not being a huge Star Trek fan, I mean, like my introduction to one Will Wheaton was as a geek icon outside of Star Trek. You know what I mean? Like the other things that he does for a geek community, you know what I mean? A champion of tabletop gaming and like, plenty of other things as well. So I will say, watching TNG, it's been fun watching a young Will Wheaton kind of do his thing and see, where that whole thing started.
I'm so glad you brought up Will Wheaton, because when I was thinking this afternoon about this, how he was just a little older than me. I'm 49 right now. So growing up, I was maybe a couple years behind. Well, am I older? No, I'm older. I'm sorry. Older than Will Wheaton. But that was a character that at first, it's cute. There's a kid on there. And then they made him super kid. And then to the point where he was superhero kid, because with, all these people in the Enterprise, and Will Wheaton had to come in and save the day. So many times Enterprise would have been destroyed if not for super kid Will Wheaton. It got to the point where the Star Trek fandom hated him so much, and this is even before social media, just writing in and talking about it, that he left the show just because he wasn't a really liked character at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But then instead of getting bitter about it, seeing him grow, like going on Eureka. I don't know if you've ever watched that show.
I watched a lot of Eureka,
yeah. And then of course, where a lot of people know who Will Wheaton is nowadays is through Big Bang Theory, and him taking that evil and just embracing it on the show, The Big Bang Theory. And then, as they always do with Star Trek characters, turn an enemy into a friend on that. But seeing Will Wheaton go from being a teenager to who he is today, and how he's embraced that Star Trek love in everything he's done. I've gotten to the point now where I absolutely love Will Wheaton and anything he can do. Rick, you're the one that got me, again, going off topic, but to read the book Ready Player One, but I didn't really read it. I listened to it because what you had said about Will Wheaton narrating the book for the book on tape, and it was phenomenal. So big fan now of Will Wheaton, just before turning that bitterness that he could have had against Star Trek and then making it his own and really winning, I think, the Star Trek fans back into the adult version of who he is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to be fair, I never had a problem with his character in Next Generation. It took me a long time to figure out that people actually hated his character. It was just like, why? What did he do? And
well, to your point, it was no fault of his own. He's just reading lines that were written for him. But,
right.
You know, a 17, 16-year-old kid, even in the early one in season 1 with the Visitor, the guy who was transporting them faster than warp speed, and it was Will Wheaton's character who discovered
the episode I'm on right now.
Yeah. Oh, well, I don't want to spoil it for you, but at the end, Will Wheaton is one of the heroes that saves the day, and you're like, oh, okay, that's cute. Okay, I can see that. But then it happens over and over and over again throughout his whole tenure on TNG. So it got just like, come on, guys, the kid can't. I mean, he can't be this good of a person. He should be running Starfleet if he is. That was kind of like
they kept using the teenager ex machina.
Yeah.
I will say that given the nature of the show, he probably shouldn't have been in there that long. Like, he shouldn't have been in there as long as he was. Well, to be fair, they shouldn't have let a child fly the ship. Anyways, I mean, just thinking about it from a story standpoint, it definitely seems like he had an arc, and his arc should have been, he's here, he grows up, and he goes off to Starfleet. And, you know, me and you know how things progressed, but that's where it should have ended.
Mm-hmm.
Going off to Star Trek, everybody's proud, everybody's happy. Maybe there was something where his shuttle got starjacked on the way to Starfleet, and then they fix it, and then he goes off, and they have a good time. But that's where it should have ended. But yeah, they probably did take it a little too far, but I still didn't really have a big problem with the whole thing.
So, once again, I'm not the Star Trek fan, so like I'm complete speculation here. But do you think, okay, so by the time TNG comes out, Star Trek's been running for a long time. Fans of Star Trek are probably getting to be a little bit of an older crowd. So they bring in Wesley and make him a young character in order to try to bring in younger viewers, make him a big character, and do all those things to try to really attract in the young viewers, and end up pushing away core fans because they're like, we don't want to watch this little kid doing stuff. You know, so we're an older crowd. You know, we want to see.
I guarantee you, I know people who are like that.
Yeah.
And I will say this. He is, oh my God, he's 6 foot tall. Criminy. Anyways, he strikes me as a lot shorter, but he's 48 right now. And I am 41. And I guarantee you, when he was on The Next Generation, he was playing younger.
Yes.
He looks younger, so that his character is younger. So that being said, I was probably around 5th grade when I'm my daughter's age right now. But, I was.
So you were the target for Wesley Crusher as a character,
right?
Like they were pushing your button.
Yeah, and you know what? They did. I was like, yeah, I can play that ship. I could. So yeah, and that honestly is probably why I liked him, because it's why I liked Spider-Man.
Yeah,
they do a thing to appeal, and sometimes it works. Sometimes it's Jar Jar Binks. It's just how it works.
Oh my gosh! When you said
that worked. Jar Jar Binks worked on its target audience.
Did it?
I mean, kids loved Jar Jar Binks when he came out. Like it did pushed away the core fans, but like they got the kids with Jar Jar Binks.
But remember also when you said that about Jar Jar Binks, there was an episode of The Big Bang Theory where Sheldon calls Will Wheaton the Jar Jar Binks of the Star Trek world, and then Will Wheaton comes around and does the "Ooh, Misa's so mad that you said that" or whatever he said, but he kind of embraced it. So anyway,
so yeah, you just made the same, a similar connection. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, that's basically what it was. It was a gambit to appeal to younger fans, which is exactly what Jar Jar Binks was, and
I get it. I mean. You can't just have a shit full of old people and think that a 10-year-old's going to dig it, but I don't know, they might. 10-year-olds dug the original series, so why not? Yeah. And didn't have a single Ewok in it.
No, just tribbles.
There's just Tribbles, which are just precious. Also, a Tribble made an appearance in Star Trek Discovery.
That's correct. Yep.
Which is actually, its appearance was very depressing. It was like just one Tribble, and it was always just one Tribble. It's like, oh, that's not good. Again, once you get there, you'll see it. It's on someone's desk, which is actually also even more depressing. Like it's a desk ornament, and it's alive because isn't he petting it at one point too?
Yeah. Yes.
So, yeah. So it's alive. Though that just you.
Now, once again, not a Star Trek fan, but Tribbles were like their excuse for crossover episodes, right? Like it's how they crossed over with other Star Trek series. And I thought I heard somebody say there was some sort of Tribble crossover with a series that wasn't Star Trek. Once again, I could be pulling this out of nowhere. But
I think what it is Tribbles are iconic. So like on the crossover series that you're talking about that wasn't Star Trek related, I think that it was just we're going to use Tribbles in this because everybody knows what Tribbles are. And then I don't know with the Deep Space Nine one that Daryl brought up earlier. I think again it was really just the layout of the show that made it work for what they wanted to do.
Gotcha.
Also, that episode was the first time I actually saw a male crew member wearing a miniskirt, because all the original episode women wore miniskirts.
I know there's one in an early episode of The Next
TNG.
Generation.
Yeah.
Because they're evacuating. They're getting ready to do the saucer separation.
Mm-hmm.
And they're evacuating. And you see a guy walking by in a mini dress. And Tiffany was like, did they all wear mini dresses? And because, of course, Tiffany's watched less Star Trek than I have. So, I mean, and I was like, no, obviously not. I mean, Picard's wearing pants.
Yeah,
But
some of the early TNGs, they had some of those guys wearing those skirts or whatever you call them.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. But I saw, like in the Trouble with Tribbles Deep Space Nine episode, one of the original, because they were on the Enterprise in the past, and one of the crew members were walking around in the mini skirt that was very prevalent in the original series. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Okay, a question I always thought was neat, not even being a Star Trek fan, but keeping it safe for work. What's the first thing you do with a holodeck?
Oh, nothing now.
If I got to keep it safe for work, I don't even want to get on the holodeck.
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I'm a big sports fan outside of Star Trek, so I probably would recreate some of my favorite sports games, but put myself in the game with Michael Jordan or Hank Aaron or Steve McNair from the Titans, and catching a touchdown pass or something. I would probably use it more just to relive some of my favorite moments in life, but put myself in the action, much like Barkley would try to do on. Well, you won't know what I'm talking about, but the later episodes of TNG and then Voyager, Dwight Schultz, who was from the A-Team, played the crazy guy. He was someone who, again, no spoilers, but he was very antisocial. So he would use the holodeck to make himself cool and put himself in situations in his life where he could go back and change something that he wished he could do and be more confident. I would use it similar to that, but put myself in some of my favorite sporting events and maybe not be the hero, but be the guy that passed the ball to Michael Jordan that hit the game-winning shot or something like that. That's what I probably would use it for.
I will say that I'm not even really much of a watch sports kind of guy, but I would probably do that. Except I wouldn't put myself in the action. I would probably set up a sport, like a famous sport event, and go and watch it.
Just sit in the stands.
Yeah, I would do that. But the main thing that I would do, and I kind of got this idea from something else, I would set up D&D games.
Yeah. I would say my use of the holodeck would probably be very Ready Player One-esque. You know what I mean? Like go and play different games that I like to play, go and view different movies that I like from different angles. You know what I mean? Just go drive a DeLorean for a while, and not just like, an actual crappy DeLorean that exists in the real world. No, one that time travels when I hit 88 miles per hour. The kind of stuff that you would do if you were in like the Oasis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah, the Oasis is actually what gave me the idea for the D&D game.
Yeah.
But I think it would be really cool to, like, even if I was doing it by myself, maybe get one of the old modules that is going to be programmed into the holodeck.
Mm-hmm. Somebody's already done it, yeah.
And pick out a couple NPCs like that. Well, like, I'll do it by myself, but I'll set up the other PCs with me. Like, maybe this time I want to go as a barbarian, and like I'll get a mage and a thief and a cleric as PCs that are controlled by the computer, and we go.
Very off topic, but you could even pick people from D&D lore. You could go in with Driss. You could go in with Mordenkainen. You could go in with Tasha or Bigby. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
it's a good time.
Definitely. I think playing with other people, though, would, one, be in more the spirit of D&D and probably way more fun in general.
Absolutely.
I will say, on your topic of what you're saying to try to keep it safe for work, there was an episode in TNG that you'll get to where Riker mentions that if someone is trying to, and trying to do it in a safe way as possible for the late 80s, early 90s when it was airing, that the holodeck, whether it was done intentionally or not, doesn't have the same type of sensual intensity with the holodeck characters as a human would be. And so it was kind of like one of those things that just didn't, I kind of got the vibe was it wouldn't work the same, or it wouldn't give you that because either it wasn't meant to do that, or it just, the technology wasn't good enough to give you that same sensation. Because there was an episode where it was titled 11011101, but some people that were really super smart came in and upgraded the holodeck only to distract Riker. And Riker was the only one supposedly on the ship, so that's why they're trying to keep him distracted. And he actually started having feelings for a holodeck character. And he's like touching you and talking to you and interacting with you. I've never had a holodeck experience like this before. This is just not like ever. I mean, and so what it was is these really, really genius species, and I can't remember their names, they made a character on the holodeck to be someone that Riker could potentially fall in love with, only to distract them so they could hijack the Enterprise. So I won't ruin any more of it. You find all that out in the first few minutes of the episode.
Sure.
But from that, I gleaned that from what Riker was saying, talking about this particular character, that's not something that I guess the Enterprise wanted people to be able to do on the holodeck. So maybe it wasn't that big of a deal. But I thought it was worth mentioning to you.
Sure.
So
I mean, the cleanup alone.
I know the Orville didn't shy away from that.
No. Nope. But I mean, I don't know. They also kind of play it to be that, like, in the Star Trek universe, that they're above things like that. Like, I mean, they could fall in love, people have desire, but no one.
With one glaring exception, Baron, the planet of Risa.
Oh yeah, but what happens on Risa stays on Risa.
There you go.
Well, there was that I think it was a virus in TNG early episode, once again because I'm in the early episodes, where everybody got infected with this virus that basically mimicked the effects of being drunk, except more intense. And that's the episode you find where Data is fully functional and anatomically correct.
Yes.
No, he's fully functional in every way.
That's right. That's exactly how it's put.
I was quoting the title of Daryl. I don't know if you ever heard of Aurelio Voltaire. He writes music, and he mostly caters to goth kids. But he did an entire Star Trek album where he wrote parody songs about Star Trek, and one of them is about Data. And I believe the title of the song is Fully Functional and Anatomically Correct.
Yeah, that would be cool.
So if you haven't checked out Aurelio Voltaire, you could probably just Google Aurelio Voltaire Star Trek and you find all the songs.
Not sponsored.
No, definitely not. Hashtag not a sponsor.
So I know you haven't got here yet to season. You just won season 1. On season 2, Baron, do you remember the episode where Data is put on trial to determine whether or not he's a sentient being?
Oh my God, yeah, that was a good one.
Oh, it was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And season 2, episode 9, when you get there, Rick, and I don't want to ruin the end of it, but
well, to be fair, I've seen clips from that episode. Like, I think that episode's famous enough that I've seen.
That episode's a big deal.
Yeah, it's been referenced, and I've seen clips, and I'm pretty sure I already know everything about that episode. So don't worry about spoilers on that one.
That was the first episode of Star Trek, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, that I cried. The ending, Baron, when they're having a party because obviously Data was ruled sentient, but Riker had to argue that he wasn't, and otherwise the judge at this deep space station said, "Well, Riker, if you don't argue for the prosecution, then I'm just going to summarily rule against Data," and he loses, and he's not sentient. So Riker was forced to argue. And so watching him research and find out things about Data he didn't know, going into his personal files, you could see him smile like, "Oh, that's so cool about Data." And then he realized, "Oh, I've got to use this against him." And so he goes in and makes a really compelling argument. So at the end, when he does win, and everyone's throwing a congratulations party for Data, well, Riker's not there, and Data realizes it. So he goes and finds Riker in his quarters, and he's like, "Commander, why are you not attending my congratulations party? Is it because you lost?" And Riker said, "I know, Data. I came this close to winning. Almost cost you your life." And then Data says, "I'm ruining the whole thing for you, but that's okay." And then Data says, "Sir, is it not true that if you hadn't argued against me, that the judge was going to rule against me?" And Riker's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, don't you see, in that moment, you sacrificed yourself and what you believe to save me." He said, "What better form of friendship is that?" And I'm probably not quoting it exactly. And
You're
so
right. Yeah,
and then he's like, "Data, you're more human than you know, my friend." And I mean, just tears. Do you think
that so good?
Gushing from my eyes.
So good.
So that's the beauty of Star Trek. That, man, you just wouldn't think that you would cry about an android, but it's so well written, and I love that episode. It's called Measure of a Man, episode 2, or season 2, episode 9.
I do think I do like how, like, his one big piece of evidence is Riker turning him off.
Yeah,
and it's like, Data could do that to you, right?
Exactly.
And then you couldn't turn back on.
Yeah, that was like my biggest compelling piece. It's like, oh, okay, so essentially you just turned his power off. His big benefit is that your argument should have been that you could turn him back on.
Right.
Because he can just reach over and turn you off, Riker. Like that. Done. I also think that Data can Vulcan nerve pitch, so he could have done it without killing him. But,
sure.
But yeah, that's still. Oh, there's your switch. Sorry.
I mean, I could see. I mean, like I said, I've seen that episode. Like you can see in the early episodes of TNG, they're almost setting up that arc. Riker gets to spend a few moments alone with Data, like in the holodeck as well, and like he sees what Data likes to do in the holodeck, and like he's amazed that he's like, "Aren't you a machine?" And he's like, "Yes, but I still like to sit out in nature." And so, and like you can see in the way the actor for Riker plays it that like he's learning and enjoying what he's learning about Data. So I mean, like it kind of sets that whole thing up from the very beginning to that they earned that emotional moment from the beginning of the series.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I like the arcs, especially because, like, I mean, the original series kind of had story arcs for the characters. Man, nothing compared to Next Generation. Man, Next Generation. I think it's because a lot of it has to do with they had the time to do it. But oh man, the story arcs that every single one of the characters had.
Even the ones that you think are gone off the show, and let me throw this out. Baron's going to know exactly where I'm going with this. Rick, one of the great characters, in my opinion, of TNG, from like What episode are you on right now?
The one, like I said, I don't remember the name of it, but I started watching the episode you were talking about. Wesley is messing with the
Okay, well, I'm
like I said, I've seen a lot of these episodes when I wasn't watching Star Trek. Like I have a friend who was into Star Trek, and I'd sit down and watch an episode. Right. I know a lot of what's going to happen. I've already spoiled a lot of the season and a lot of the series for myself, so don't worry about spoilers. And don't worry about spoilers for our listeners either, because they should know.
If by now, then it's your luck. Tasha Yar, the character of Tasha Yar didn't make it through season 1. She was killed off. Okay, but she appears back in season 3 or 4 in Yesterday's Enterprise. That is my number 1 favorite episode of all of TNG, Yesterday's Enterprise, when you get to it. So she comes back in because of back alive because one of the previous, I believe it was Enterprise C, the one that predated Enterprise D, comes through a time warp. And when they do, the Klingon war with the Federation is back on because Enterprise C was helpful in the Khitomer attack when the Romulans attacked Klingons, and because Enterprise C wasn't there, the Federation didn't come to the Klingon help, and so then they're back at war. But because they're back at war, Tasha Yar is back on the Enterprise now, and so through some time traveling stuff, Tasha Yar gets back on Enterprise C, goes back through the wharf, back through the time warp, saves the Klingons, but they think that Tasha Yar dies in that other timeline. So you're thinking, okay, cool. We got to see Denise Crosby one more time. Then, like 2 or 3 seasons later, in season 5 or 6, Denise Crosby's back on it again, and you think it's Tasha Yar, but it's Tasha Yar's daughter, who, because she went back through that thing, she was captured by the Romulans and then taken as a slave, had a kid that looks just like her. So even though Denise Crosby's character was killed off in season 1, she appears like 10, 11, 12 more times in a story arc about her character or her character's offspring. Phenomenal how they're able to take that character from season 1 and bring her back and make it so relevant and dynamic acting by Denise Crosby. And that's one of those things that I just love about Star Trek, how you think Denise Crosby's off the show. They needed to make some budget cuts. She's gone, but she was so beloved by the Star Trek fandom. Rick Berman and the writers were able to bring her back in and make significant canon with Star Trek and her character. It's the story arcs of Star Trek. For those who haven't seen it, go back and watch it. It's phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad I started watching TNG because we seem to be touching on TNG a lot.
It really picked up where the Next Generation or the original series left off, especially like in terms of like the movies and stuff. It really updated the feel of the entire thing, and it completely influenced every Trek thing after it. And again, that's including the Orville and even Lower Decks. I mean, and then Picard even. The Next Generation series is still going. It's still going with Picard coming out. That just confirms that this timeline is still going on, and these characters are still relevant. They are still important to the Star Trek universe, and it's a great. If you've never seen a single episode of the original series, you can still watch the Next Generation and be perfectly fine. Mm-hmm. You might be a little confused on Deep Space Nine. You might be a little confused. You might be a little confused on Voyager. Next Generation is perfect. You don't have to watch anything else. You should, but you don't have to.
Well, Rick, let me ask you a question. Turn the tables. The guest asked a question to the host. Since you know Voyager, you pretty much watched most of or all of Voyager from beginning to end.
A good amount of it, yeah.
Let me ask you, who was the luckiest main character of the series on Voyager? Do you think?
Oh wow, you're asking me to remember things from elementary school.
The luckiest main character.
Yeah, the person if being stranded on Voyager was the luckiest thing that could have happened to him.
Yeah, I honestly, I've got. I mean, just because I watched it when I was in elementary school.
Touche, but the character of Tom Paris.
I was about to say Paris.
Mm-hmm.
Because days before the caretaker ripped Voyager to the Delta Quadrant, he was in jail. You
What
know,
a beautiful jail that was.
I know, right? I wanna go to jail. But he was in jail for, you know, committing crimes, and he was kicked out of Starfleet. But his whole life turned around, got married, had a kid, just because, you know. So when everyone, I love that story arc again, how everyone else is homesick, and his best friend Ensign Kim just dreams about going home and taking every last hope they can get home. And here's Tom Paris literally saying in one of the episodes, I don't care if we go back. My life's pretty good out here in the Delta Quadrant. I don't want to go home, because I go home, I might be facing prison again. So that whole timeline, and of like, that was the best case scenario for Tom Paris, and being able to work that around, it was phenomenal. The Voyager, that's why I said, if I'm going to go back and watch an episode or a season just for feel gooding and action, TNG is great. But for whatever reason, I find myself drawn to watching episodes of Voyager. It was such great out of the box thinking when it came to the Star Trek world, totally different from how TNG worked. And again, it's not everyone's favorite, but I know it kind of struggled in the ratings. Again, I think it's because it was on a network show and not syndication. So it had to air. If you wanted to watch Voyager, you had to watch it on Wednesdays or Thursday nights on UPN. You couldn't watch it on reruns on your local independent station here in Nashville, Channel 17, which is who aired Next Generation, and then they aired it 2 or 3 times throughout the weekend. So, but Voyager is by far some of the best overall series. Again, if the Next Generation, you take it out and you're looking at Enterprise, Discovery, Deep Space Nine, or Voyager, Voyager is my favorite of the best of the rest, I guess, because it was a lot of really good storylines. And again, 7 of 9, Jerry Ryan. So,
would you say among Star Trek fans, it's pretty accepted that TNG is probably like the best, if not one of the best?
Depending on the age group, I think there's going to be a big shift. I'd say maybe 40% will say TOS, 40% will say Next Generation, and then everyone else is fighting for the other 20%. But people in our age group, from my age 50 down to, you know, whatever you are, Rick, and you're in your mid-30s, I think most of those people will say TNG. So, but taking TNG out of it, I just really thought because again, when you're writing about Next Generation or even Deep Space Nine, you have so much canon you have to, because again, if you mess anything up, Trekkies will be the first one to say, you can't do that because of this episode, back in this episode, this happened and this happened, and so you're going out of canon. But they didn't have that problem on Voyager because, you know, they were in the Delta Quadrant. No one's ever been there. So I think the writers kind of freed themselves from the shackles of having to go back to the Star Trek Bible and say, can we say this in this episode about Shatner or whatever, because, you know, we don't want to do anything that's outside of canon. So, and they didn't have that problem in Voyager. So that's why I really liked it.
So something I do want to bring up, as a geek community, geeks have a lot to thank Star Trek for. You know, I don't think we'd have a major convention scene if not for Star Trek and Star Trek conventions. You know, there's a lot of shows where there's a lot of things, like I said, with that, you know, first interracial kiss on television, and like, you know, a lot of that pushing the envelope and pushing things forward. A lot of shows were like, okay, we're allowed to do this now. These are things we're allowed to do. And without Star Trek, pardon bringing it up, but boldly going where no one had gone before, you know what I mean? No way they could have gone that. And me being a cosplayer myself, I got to kind of bring it up. Star Trek cosplay is probably like the first thing that brought cosplay into the major scene. Like without Star Trek, there are no professional cosplayers. There is no major cosplay scene. So that being said, budget and skill not being an obstacle, what Star Trek character are you cosplaying at the next convention?
That's a good question. If I was going to dress up, I wouldn't want to be the same as everyone else, and everyone's going to be wearing the red Federation commanding uniform to be Picard or Riker. If I was going to cosplay, I would probably go as something that, again, going back to Voyager, one of the villain characters or races that really intrigued me was, I almost said Jim Hardar, but that's Deep Space Nine, Hirogen. I don't know if you remember the Hirogen. They were the hunters in Voyager that hunted other species. They would actually capture them and then release them and go back and try to hunt them down again. And they took over the Voyager ship so they could use their holodeck to have unlimited So I would probably go with a character like the Hirogen, something that would be noticeable to Star Trek fans, but not one that probably a lot of people would dress up as. So, and I thought their uniforms were really cool. So I'd probably go as maybe dress up as the Hirogen. What about you, Baron?
Like what would I choose to cosplay?
Yeah. So once again, budget and skill not being an obstacle. Let's say you got to put together a perfect costume.
I would, and this is something that I've been wanting to work on for quite a while. I would want to cosplay as a Starfleet chaplain.
Okay.
I have yet to see an actual Starfleet chaplain in any of the shows or movies, but I would imagine they have to exist.
Sure.
So yeah, I kind of wanted to, and I think I've seen some examples in fan art, or I'm not sure if I've seen any kind of cosplay for it, but it's something I've always wanted to do.
Yeah, I think that'd be really neat. And with it not being a quote unquote canon thing, it kind of gives you a lot of license to decide what you think it would look like.
Yes, exactly.
I think, me personally, I would probably go for a Borg. I think I'd want to go with, I think they have really cool designs, a lot of technical parts to that costume, instantly recognizable. I think I'd want to do a Borg.
It would make for a cool costume, especially with no restrictions to budget.
Right, exactly. That's the big one, because in order to get a lot of those technical parts in, those pieces of machinery and things like that's probably be outside of my current cosplaying budget. But if budget and skill weren't an issue, they immediately go straight for Borg.
Nice.
One of the things that about DS9, I liked. I just want to touch on a couple things I like about Deep Space Nine on here, since we're talking Star Trek. Is first off, I love the whole shift they did, because Deep Space Nine really had trouble getting traction. I think in the first 2 or 3 seasons, bringing Worf over helped a lot, because it brought a lot of the TNG fans back to watch Deep Space Nine that maybe left it after season 2 or 3, because you brought a TNG character there. And then the fight with the Dominion, bringing the changelings in. And that may have been their plan the whole time, because having Odo there. But I really loved how the Dominion played out, with Odo finding his people, and the Jem'Hadar being the new Klingons. But then the one thing about Deep Space Nine that I truly personally loved, as I'm a big conspiracy theorist kind of person when it comes to movies and TV shows, not really in real life, but Section 31, which is the secret CIA type part of the Federation. And towards the end of the season, they hit 3 or 4 episodes where Dr. Bashir and Chief O'Brien were kind of getting sucked into that whole secret CIA Section 31. And I believe that was the first time it was brought up in the Star Trek world, that there was a secret spy program in Starfleet. It was they mentioned it, I remember, in Enterprise with Scott Bakula, a show, and then it was huge in Discovery. So they really hit Section 31 and Discovery a lot. But that whole, everything in the Federation, oh, we're so pure, we're honest, we do this or that. But then talking about how there was a spy program where they would plant spies in other, like in the Romulans and the Klingons and even Vulcan, and seeing that, yeah, even the Federation can get their hands dirty a little bit. So I really like the introduction of Section 31 in Deep Space Nine. I don't know how you feel about that, Baron.
I don't really know. I mean,
it wasn't a major thing, but it was one of those, they introduced it in the original one. But then, like I said, Discovery, it's not trying to spoil anything, but in Discovery, Section 31 is pretty much the whole,
right
plot of that series, season 1.
It was, and excuse the term, but it was kind of shady when it first came out. So it was kind of like, Section 31 is like, I always kind of felt like they were like the secret bad guys, but then they were doing good things, kind of.
Good things, but in a bad way.
Right, yeah. And it's like, and that was always kind of like one of those whole, I like the progressive feeling of Star Trek, but then it was just like, but maybe I should be okay with an undercover wet works Black Ops team working behind the lines, keeping me safe. And it was like, I'm not necessarily okay with that, but they were cool.
Hence the conflict Dr. Brashear had with them. He knew that
Right,
they were
right.
the greater good of the Federation, but he was that was the conflict. Do I turn them in? Do I try to stop them, even though ultimately they're doing good? They're doing it in a bad way, and that's the conflict that most of us have on a daily basis in some way or the other. So that it kind of showed the like you said, the shady side of the Federation.
Kind of soils the idea of that perfect utopia that they kind of put forth.
Yes. I mean, in a way, yeah, but it just shows that they're the human side that doesn't necessarily always go away in people as much as you try to make it perfect. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, I just wanted to make sure Section 31 got a shout out.
Yeah, they definitely wove a complex tapestry with that organization.
And the last thing, if I can just hoard these last few minutes a little bit,
absolutely.
HORD. I would love, and it'll have to happen offline, but when you get to the next to last episode of season 1, Next Generation, Rick, I want to explain what you just saw in the episode called Conspiracy, and B, why it was never mentioned ever again. It's like that. If they could pull an episode from never happening after the fact, it would have been season 1 episode. I think it's 23. It's the next to last episode called Conspiracy. And that was also kind of like a Section 31, but it scared a lot of kids they were trying to get to because the body literally exploded in the last scene and guts and stuff went everywhere. And B, it was a storyline that they wanted to continue in the next upcoming seasons, but they got so much hate from parents and really a lot of people that it was like one of those episodes they can just go back and not ever do. Rick Berman said that would have been the one they would have done. So I want to see what your take is on it when you see that episode, Rick.
Well, I think now that we have condensed years and years and years of Star Trek lore into about an hour and a half by talking about Star Trek Next Generation for most of it, I think. And I'm happy about that. Don't get me wrong. I think it was a good way to do it, but I think that we touched on a lot of good things, and I think we really caught the spirit of Star Trek, Starfleet, the galaxy at large, and hopefully we can maybe it's a little lofty of me to hope, but maybe this podcast episode will help keep that spirit alive and carry it on into the future, into a hopeful Starfleet utopia.
This is a geek culture podcast first and foremost. So I do want to say thank you to Star Trek and anyone who's ever had anything to do with Star Trek for everything it's contributed to geek culture. We definitely wouldn't be where we are in geek culture without Star Trek. Make sure to check us out on Spotify. We try to post podcasts on Mondays. Check us out on twitch.tv/Casters Guild. We're streaming about every other Sunday now for D&D. And keep an eye on our Twitch channel as you will lead you to our Extra Life link, where in the month of September and October and November, we are attempting to raise money for the Children's Hospital at Vanderbilt and Johns Hopkins to give healthcare to kids who can't afford it. And during the crisis, it's needed now more than ever. If you have any questions or any ideas for topics, hit us up at castersguild@gmail.com, and we will answer your question on the next podcast. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Beat me up.